Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun stood perfectly still as the Vekthari soldiers circled him like predators around wounded prey. The alien marketplace buzzed with activity, but every eye was now focused on the scene unfolding in the central plaza of Nexus Prime. The jewel of the Galactic Federation's trade empire. The lead Vekthari, General Dexlon, towered nearly 8 feet tall with blue-black chitinous armor naturally grown from his exoskeleton. His forearms gestured dismissively at Marcus while his compound eyes glittered with amusement. Behind him, a dozen more Vekthari soldiers formed a semicircle, their plasma rifles held casually but ready. "Look at this pathetic creature," Dexlon announced in perfect Federation standard, his voice carrying across the plaza through natural amplification chambers in his throat. "The mighty humans send us this weak, soft thing as their representative. No natural armor, no claws, no proper weapons. How did such a fragile species ever survive their primitive world?" Hundreds of Federation citizens had gathered to watch. Tall, graceful Selenites with their crystalline skin recorded everything with bioluminescent displays. Stocky Corvin merchants paused their haggling to point and laugh. Even the normally peaceful ethereal collective's representatives whispered among themselves, their translucent forms shimmering with what Marcus had learned meant amusement. Marcus remained silent, his hands clasped behind his back in a relaxed parade rest position. He wore simple Federation diplomatic clothing, a dark blue uniform with minimal decoration. The only hint of his true identity was a small green patch on his shoulder that most aliens wouldn't recognize. "I heard humans claim to be warriors," Dexlon continued, walking closer until his massive frame cast Marcus completely in shadow. "But this one won't even defend himself when insulted. Perhaps their reputation is nothing but propaganda designed to make up for their obvious physical weaknesses." The crowd's laughter grew louder. A few Corvin traders began, placing bets on how long the human would stand their taking. Abuse before breaking down completely. Dexlon reached out with one of his secondary arms and flicked Marcus's shoulder, hard enough to make him take a small step backward. No reaction at all. Just like all soft-worlders, they fold the moment real pressure is applied. Marcus slowly turned his head to look up at the towering alien general. His voice was calm and quiet, barely audible over the crowd's jeering. "Are you quite finished, General?" "Finished?" Dexlon's mandibles clicked together in what Marcus knew was the Vekthari equivalent of laughter. "I'm just getting started, soft skin. Tell me, what exactly makes humans think they deserve a seat at the adults' table? Your people have no natural weapons, no armor, no superior technology. You barely managed to develop faster-than-light travel on your own. What possible contribution could you make to a galaxy full of actually evolved species?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully as if seriously considering the question. "Well, General, humans do have one particular skill that seems to be uncommon among Federation species. And what laughable ability might that be?" "Pattern recognition." Dexlon's head tilted slightly, confused by the seemingly random response. "Pattern recognition? That's your great human advantage?" "Among other things, yes." Marcus's voice remained perfectly calm. "For instance, I've noticed an interesting pattern about your forces here on Nexus Prime. What are you babbling about, human?" Marcus looked around the plaza slowly, his eyes taking in details that most observers would miss. "Your soldiers are all positioned at exactly 37-meter intervals around major population centers. Your patrol routes follow a precise geometric pattern that repeats every 4 hours and 18 minutes. Your supply convoys always use the same 3 routes, with the heaviest security on the eastern approach, which, incidentally, is also the most vulnerable to disruption because it relies on that single bridge over the Calyx Canyon." Dexlon's compound eyes focused more sharply on Marcus. Several of his officers exchanged glances that Marcus caught even though they probably thought they were being subtle. "You've also positioned your main communications array on the highest tower in the government district," Marcus continued conversationally. "Smart choice for signal propagation, but it makes the entire command structure vulnerable to anyone who can reach an elevation of approximately 800 meters within a 3-kilometer radius. There are at least 14 buildings that would work perfectly for that purpose. The laughter in the crowd was beginning to die down as people realized this wasn't going the way they'd expected. Furthermore, Marcus said, turning back to face Thexlon directly, your personal guard detail follows you in a standard diamond formation with overlapping fields of fire, but they're all carrying MKV plasma rifles, which means they have a charging cycle of 1.3 seconds between shots and a maximum sustained fire rate that drops off significantly after 90 seconds of continuous use. Thexlon S. Primary hands moved instinctively toward his sidearm. How do you know these details about our equipment specifications? Marcus smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, and something about that smile made several members of the crowd take an involuntary step backward. General, I appreciate your demonstration of Vakthari superiority, but I think there may have been a small misunderstanding about what I am. He reached up slowly and touched the green patch on his shoulder. You see, I'm not here as a diplomat. The marketplace had grown eerily quiet. Even the ambient noise of the city seemed to fade as if the planet itself was holding its breath. I'm here, Marcus continued in the same calm, conversational tone, as an advanced reconnaissance specialist. United States Army Special Forces. What you might know from your intelligence briefings as a Green Beret. Thexlon's eyes widened slightly. Even in the far reaches of the galaxy, that particular designation carried weight among military professionals. My mission here was simple: spend 30 days conducting detailed observation of Vakthari military capabilities, defensive positions, command structures, equipment specifications, personnel patterns, and strategic vulnerabilities. Then report back to my command with a comprehensive tactical assessment. Marcus looked around the plaza again, but this time his gaze had a different quality, like a predator evaluating hunting grounds. I completed that mission about 20 minutes ago. I was actually heading to my transport to return to Earth when you decided to make this into a public spectacle. He paused, tilting his head slightly. Though I have to admit, having your entire command, staff conveniently gathered in one location while providing me with detailed information about your operational philosophy has been educational. Thexlon's mandibles stopped clicking. The casual confidence in his posture evaporated as the implications of what the human was saying began to sink in. You're claiming that one human spent a month cataloging our entire defensive infrastructure? Thexlon's voice had lost its mocking tone. Impossible. Our security is adequate against conventional surveillance, Marcus interrupted gently. But humans have a rather different approach to gathering intelligence. We don't rely entirely on technology or natural advantages. We observe. We adapt. We think, he gestured casually toward the government district. For example, your communications array isn't just vulnerable because of its position. It's vulnerable because the technician who maintains it takes his lunch break at exactly 1400 hours every day, always sits at the same cafe, and always leaves his security badge visible in his jacket pocket. The same jacket he hangs on the back of his chair while he eats. Thexlon's head snapped toward one of his aides, who nodded slowly in confirmation. Your supply convoys aren't just predictable because of their routes, Marcus continued. They're predictable because your logistics coordinator has a gambling addiction and can always be found at the same establishment 3 nights a week, where he talks quite freely about scheduling challenges when he's had too much to drink. Another aide's face went pale, and your defensive positions aren't just geometrically precise. They're staffed by soldiers who, despite their impressive physical capabilities, have been trained to respond to threats according to doctrine that assumes all enemies will attack in the same manner that other Federation species attack. Marcus clasped his hands behind his back again. But humans don't attack like other Federation species, General. We don't have natural armor or superior technology or overwhelming physical advantages. So we develop something else instead, which is Imagination. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the plaza, the gathered crowds were beginning to understand that this was no longer a simple humiliation of a weak human. This was something much more dangerous. While you were focused on displaying your superiority, Marcus said quietly, I was cataloging every detail I could observe about your command structure. Your defensive capabilities, your tactical doctrines, your equipment limitations, your personnel weaknesses, and your operational patterns. More importantly, I was thinking about how all of those pieces fit together. He looked directly into the Exelon's compound eyes. And I was thinking about what would happen if someone decided to test those systems. Are you threatening the Vekthari Empire? The Exelon's voice carried a dangerous edge. Not at all, General. I'm simply pointing out that pattern recognition W. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the briefing room aboard the UES Defiance, her face composed but her eyes burning with cold fury as she read her brother's report for the third time. Around the conference table, the assembled officers of Task Force Retribution maintained perfect silence, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Chun finally said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 20 years commanding ships in the void between stars. 3 hours ago, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun was publicly humiliated by Vekthari forces on Nexus Prime in what appears to be a deliberate provocation designed to test human resolve. She activated the holographic display at the center of the table. Marcus's face appeared, followed by footage from security cameras that had captured the entire incident in the marketplace. The Vekthari made several critical errors in judgment, she continued as the recording played. First, they assumed that public humiliation would demonstrate their superiority over humanity. Second, they failed to recognize that they were dealing with a Special Forces reconnaissance specialist rather than a civilian diplomat. And third, they provided detailed tactical intelligence while believing they were in a position of absolute safety. Colonel James Harrison, commander of the 1st Space Marine Expeditionary Unit, leaned forward. Admiral, with respect, while this was clearly an insult to the sergeant and to humanity, is it sufficient justification for military action? The Vekthari could claim it was simply a misunderstanding. Admiral Chun's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. Colonel, the Vekthari Empire has just demonstrated that they consider human military personnel to be acceptable targets for public ridicule and intimidation. They have made it clear that they view humanity as weak and unworthy of respect. She gestured to the hologram, which now showed tactical displays of Vekthari positions throughout their empire. More importantly, they have provided us with unprecedented intelligence about their military capabilities, defensive positions, command structures, and tactical doctrines. Captain Elena Vasquez, commanding officer of the stealth frigate UES Shadowhawk, studied the displays with professional interest. These are incredibly detailed assessments, Admiral. How long has the sergeant been gathering this intelligence? 30 days of deep reconnaissance on their most heavily defended world, Admiral Chun replied. But the Vekthari's behavior in the marketplace tells us something even more valuable than their tactical positions. She manipulated the holographic controls, bringing up psychological profiles and tactical assessments. General Exelon's response pattern shows us exactly how Vekthari command authority operates under pressure. They rely on intimidation rather than tactical thinking. They assume that superior physical characteristics translate directly to military superiority. And most importantly, they have no conception of asymmetric warfare. Commander David Park, the task force's intelligence officer, nodded slowly. They're fighting the last war, Admiral. Their entire tactical doctrine is based on facing enemies who approach conflict the same way they do. Exactly. Admiral Chun manipulated the display again, bringing up comparisons between Vekthari and human tactical approaches. The Vekthari Empire has conquered 17 different species in the past 2 centuries. Every single one of those species fought them using conventional force-on-force tactics. Superior technology versus superior technology. Larger fleets against smaller fleets. Direct confrontation. Colonel Harrison was beginning to understand. And humans don't fight that way. Humans, Admiral Chun said with satisfaction, fight to win. We use whatever advantages we have, exploit whatever weaknesses we can find. And we adapt faster than our enemies can respond to our adaptations. She gestured to the tactical displays showing Vakthari defensive positions throughout their empire. The sergeant's intelligence shows us that their entire military structure is designed around preventing exactly the kind of attacks they've faced before. Massive fleet actions. Direct assaults on fortified positions. Conventional siege warfare. Captain Vasquez was studying the stealth requirements for various Vakthari installations. They're not prepared for infiltration, sabotage, or coordinated strikes on critical infrastructure. More than that, Commander Park added, they're not prepared for enemies who think creatively about what constitutes a legitimate target. Their defenses are focused on protecting military installations and population centers, but their entire economy is vulnerable. Admiral Chun nodded approvingly. Gentlemen and ladies, the Vakthari Empire is about to receive an education in human tactical thinking. Operation Checkmate is now authorized. She manipulated the holographic display to show the complete Vakthari Empire. Dozens of star systems connected by carefully planned trade routes and communication networks. Phase 1. Captain Vasquez. The Shadowhawk will infiltrate the Nexus system and conduct precision strikes on their primary communications relay. According to the sergeant's intelligence, eliminating that single target will disrupt command and control for the entire sector. Captain Vasquez smiled grimly. The Shadowhawk can be in position within 18 hours. Admiral, Phase 2, Colonel Harrison. Your Marines will conduct simultaneous raids on 3 key logistics hubs identified in the sergeant's report. These facilities are lightly defended because the Vakthari consider them non-military targets. Destroying them will cripple their ability to supply their forward positions. Colonel Harrison was already studying the tactical requirements. We can hit all 3 simultaneously using drop pods deployed from stealth approach vectors. Based on these intelligence reports, we should be able to complete the objectives and extract before they can mount effective resistance. Phase 3, Commander Park. You will coordinate cyber warfare operations against their financial networks. The sergeant identified several critical vulnerabilities in their economic systems that suggest they rely entirely on centralized computational networks for trade coordination. Commander. Park's expression was predatory. Admiral, if these intelligence reports are accurate, I can crash their entire economy within 6 hours of initiating cyber operations. Admiral Chun stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars where the Vakthari Empire spread across dozens of systems, unaware that their fate was already sealed. The Vakthari made the mistake of assuming that human weakness would make us easy targets, she said quietly. They believe that our lack of natural armor, claws, and superior individual physical capabilities makes us inferior warriors. She turned back to face her officers. They are about to learn that human strength was never about physical advantages. Human strength is about looking at an impossible situation and finding a way to win anyway. The holographic display shifted to show human force distributions. Small, scattered units positioned throughout space in patterns that would seem random to conventional military thinking. While the Vakthari have been building massive fleets and fortifying fixed positions, we have been developing something they never expected, the ability to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Captain Vasquez checked her mission chronometer. Admiral, should we expect Vakthari retaliation against Earth or other human colonies? Admiral Chun's smile was cold as vacuum. Captain, that assumes they'll have time to organize retaliation. According to the sergeant's intelligence, the Vakthari command structure relies entirely on hierarchical authority flowing down from sector commanders. She gestured to the tactical displays showing Vakthari command positions. Phase 4 will eliminate that command structure in its entirety. Colonel Harrison looked up sharply. Admiral? Simultaneous precision strikes on 17 different command centers across their empire. timed to occur within a 30-second window. Admiral Chun's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing routine maintenance schedules. Human strike teams are already in position near each target. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed the implications of what she was describing. Commander Park spoke first. Admiral, you're talking about coordinating military operations across dozens of light years with split-second timing. The technology exists, Commander. Quantum communication arrays allow instantaneous coordination regardless of distance. The question was never whether we could coordinate such an operation. The question was whether we had sufficient intelligence to make it effective. She gestured toward Marcus's report. Thanks to the sergeant's work and thanks to General Vexlon's helpful demonstration in the marketplace, we now have that intelligence. Admiral Chun walked back to the conference table and placed her hands flat on its surface, leaning forward to address her officers directly. Ladies and gentlemen, understand what we are about to accomplish. In the space of approximately 6 hours, human forces will simultaneously cripple Vakthari communications, destroy their logistics infrastructure, crash their economy, and eliminate their command authority. She paused, letting that sink in. We will accomplish this using fewer than 300 personnel total, operating with equipment that the Vakthari would consider primitive, against an empire that spans dozens of star systems and commands fleets that could glass entire planets. Captain Vasquez shook her head in amazement. How is that possible? Because General Vexlon was reviewing security reports in his command center when the lights went out. For exactly 3.7 seconds, the primary command facility for the entire Nexus sector existed in complete darkness and absolute silence. No emergency lighting. No backup power systems. No communication networks. Nothing. When the lights flickered back on, powered by tertiary systems that should never have been needed, General Vexlon found himself staring at displays showing catastrophic system failures across his entire command structure. Report? He barked at his communications officer, but the Vakthari was staring at dead screens with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been shattered. General, the officer said slowly, all communication with Sector Command is down. All links to the fleet are severed. The primary communication array is gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? I mean it no longer exists, sir. Something destroyed the entire installation. The quantum entanglement chambers, the relay stations, the backup transmitters, everything has been reduced to component atoms. General Vexlon felt the first cold touch of genuine fear. The communication array was positioned on the highest tower in the government district, surrounded by defensive systems that could stop anything short of a full fleet bombardment. More importantly, it was 800 meters above ground level and protected by energy shields that would require sustained assault by heavy weapons to penetrate. How is that possible? He demanded. What kind of weapon could, his question was interrupted by his aide rushing into the command center with a datapad that was displaying emergency alerts from across Vakthari space. General, we're receiving fragmented reports from multiple sectors. Logistics hubs at Veridon, Korthak, and Zephyrus have all gone offline simultaneously. The financial networks are showing massive systemic failures, and we're detecting explosions at command centers in 17 different systems. General Vexlon grabbed the datapad and scrolled through reports that read like a catalog of impossible disasters. Military installations that had stood for decades were simply gone. Economic systems that had operated flawlessly for centuries were crashing in ways that their designers had claimed were mathematically impossible. Command centers that were defended by the most advanced technology in the galaxy had been eliminated with surgical precision. This has to be some kind of coordinated attack, he said, his tactical mind finally engaging despite the shock. But what force could coordinate simultaneous strikes across dozens of star systems? The logistics alone would require. He stopped speaking as the implications of his own question hit him. The logistics would require exactly the kind of detailed intelligence that a human reconnaissance specialist might gather during 30 days of observation. The kind of intelligence that could identify critical vulnerabilities in systems that appeared impregnable. The kind of intelligence that could reveal the precise locations, timing patterns, and defensive capabilities of targets across an entire empire. General Vexlon's compound eyes focused on the data pad with a new understanding that sent ice through his circulatory system. Every single target that was being attacked was a facility or installation that had been mentioned in his conversation with Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun in the marketplace 3 hours ago. "Get me a connection to High Command immediately," he ordered. "Sir, that's what I've been trying to explain. All connections to High Command have been severed. The quantum communication network is completely down across all sectors." General Vexlon stared at his communications officer for several long seconds, processing information that his mind was reluctant to accept. "Are you telling me that the entire Vekthari Empire has been cut off from centralized command in the space of minutes?" "Yes, sir. As far as we can determine, every sector commander is now operating independently with no way to coordinate with higher authority or with each other." The general walked to his tactical display and called up strategic maps of the Empire. What he saw there made his mandibles go completely still. The attacks weren't random. They weren't the result of overwhelming force or superior technology. They were precise, surgical strikes that had been planned with perfect knowledge of Vekthari. Defensive doctrine and strategic vulnerabilities. More terrifying than the attacks themselves was their timing. Whoever had planned this operation had somehow achieved simultaneous coordination across dozens of light years, striking multiple targets within seconds of each other despite the physical impossibility of faster-than-light communication between the attack teams. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "I'm detecting human ships in 17 different systems. Small vessels, mostly frigates and destroyers. Nothing that should be capable of the kind of damage we're seeing." General Vexlon felt the pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. "Show me the tactical analysis of those engagements." The holographic display filled with battle reports that told a story of military precision that bordered on the supernatural. Human forces had appeared at each target location simultaneously, despite being separated by vast distances. They had struck with perfect knowledge of defensive positions, guard rotations, and structural vulnerabilities. They had achieved complete operational objectives and disappeared before effective resistance could be organized. "General," his aide said quietly, "there's something else. We're receiving reports that human cyber warfare specialists have penetrated our financial networks. Trade systems across the Empire are crashing. Economic coordination between sectors has been completely disrupted." General Vexlon closed his eyes for a moment, finally understanding the full scope of what was happening to his empire. This wasn't a conventional military assault. This was something far more dangerous. A systematic dismantling of every system that held Vekthari civilization together. "How long?" he asked. "Sir, how long has this been planned?" "How long have human forces been in position to coordinate an operation of this magnitude?" His intelligence officer consulted multiple data streams before answering. "Based on the precision of the attacks and the intelligence required to plan them, we estimate that human reconnaissance personnel have been gathering information throughout our empire for at least 6 months. Possibly longer. 6 months. While the Vekthari had been secure in their assumption of superiority, human operatives had been cataloging every weakness, every vulnerability, every critical point of failure in their civilization." General Vexlon thought about his encounter with Staff Sergeant Chun in the marketplace, the human's perfect calm, his detailed knowledge of Vekthari tactical positions, his casual reference to pattern recognition. "Pattern recognition?" the general said aloud. "Sir, the human in the marketplace? He said humans were good at pattern recognition?" General Vexlon looked around his command center, finally understanding what he was looking at. "They didn't just gather intelligence on our defenses. They analyzed patterns in our thinking, our strategic doctrines, our assumptions about how warfare should be conducted." He manipulated the tactical display to show the full scope of the day's attacks. "Look at this. Every target they hit was something we considered either impossible to attack or not worth defending because it wasn't a military installation. His staff gathered around the display as the general traced the pattern of the human assault. They destroyed our communications first because they understood that our command structure relies on centralized authority. They hit our logistics hubs because they realized that our military forces can't operate independently for extended periods. They crashed our financial networks because they recognized that our economic systems are completely dependent on real-time computational coordination. General Vexlon straightened, his tactical mind finally grasping the full scope of human strategic thinking. And they did all of this simultaneously because they understood that giving us time to adapt would allow us to compensate for individual losses. General, his communications officer reported, I'm receiving fragmentary reports from surviving installations. It appears that human forces have withdrawn from all target locations. They completed their objectives and disappeared. Disappeared to where? Unknown, sir. Our tracking systems show no sign of human vessels in any of the affected systems. General Vexlon nodded slowly. Of course, the humans had withdrawn. This had never been about occupying Vekthari territory or engaging in prolonged conflict. This had been about proving a point. Sir, his aide said hesitantly, what are your orders? General Vexlon looked around his command center, taking inventory of an empire that had been reduced to isolated sectors with no central coordination, no reliable logistics, and no economic stability. All accomplished by a species that the Vekthari had considered physically inferior and technologically primitive. My orders, he said quietly, are to begin immediate negotiations for a full diplomatic resolution to this conflict. Sir, we're surrendering? We're acknowledging reality. General Vexlon gestured toward the tactical displays showing the devastation human forces had accomplished in less than 6 hours. The humans have just demonstrated that they can dismantle our entire civilization anytime they choose to. Do so using force levels that we previously would have considered insignificant. He thought about